Good afternoon, folks. This is Rich Pirog, Director for the MSU Center for Regional Food System. Welcome to this national webinar. We'll get started momentarily. Please hold on. We have a hello from Minnesota from Clement Liu. Okay, welcome folks. We are going to get started. It's 3:02 p.m. Eastern Time. Welcome to this national webinar. My name is Rich Pirog. I'm the director for the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems. This national webinar, the title, and it's a long one, Networks and Systems that Support Success for Educators, Students, and Researchers at Native American, Historically Black, and Hispanic-Serving Higher Education Institutions. This webinar is sponsored by our center, MSU Center for Regional Food Systems, and the Racial Equity in the Food Systems Work Group. Rachel, next slide, please. So a bit of context of why we're doing this webinar. The Center for Regional Food Systems and the Racial Equity in Food Systems Working Group, the two sponsors for this webinar, have been conducting webinars at the intersection of food systems and racial equity for the last 2.5 years. This is, I believe, our 11th or 12th webinar. Historically, a majority of our audience for these webinars are from white-led institutions such as 1862 land grants, nonprofit organizations, other organizations. And what we have found from these previous webinars is an eagerness to learn more about and engage staff, whether they be educators and researchers and students at historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, and Hispanic-serving institutions. Now, one of our speakers is going to be talking more about Hispanic-serving institutions, but because I have articulated that term here, and we realize some of you may not know what that is, I've put a very brief definition down for this slide. Hispanic-serving institutions are defined in Title V of the Higher Education Act as not-for-profit institutions of higher learning with a full-time equivalent or an FTE undergraduate student enrollment that is at least 25% Hispanic. And one of our panelists, Richard Montez, will be sharing more about his organization and Hispanic-serving institutions. The other reason that we're doing this webinar is that both the Center for Regional Food Systems and our Racial Equity and Food System National Working Group have found, as we've done our own learning journeys over the years, is to build more trust-based partnerships with various institutions. It's really critical to understand it and how these institutions define, operationalize strategies for success for their educators, their researchers, and their students. A term that is used often, and we take it very seriously, is how can we learn and how can we move at the speed of trust? Next slide, please. Just briefly, the Center for Regional Food Systems at Michigan State is a small center in the College of Ag and Natural Resources. We have about 18 staff. We work in a variety of areas in local and regional food systems. We do work in Michigan. Nationally, we have one staff person that works in Africa. You see a list here of the different areas that we work in, and certainly with this webinar series and our partnership with the Racial Equity and Food System Working Group, the intersection of equity issues and food systems. And the slides you see, the pictures on the bottom are just examples of some of the programs or publications that we are associated with. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn things over to my fellow colleague at the Center for Regional Food Systems and the moderator for this session, Clea Souza. Clea is the Food Systems Equity and Advocacy Specialist at the Center for Regional Food Systems. Clea.
All right, thank you, Rich. So before I begin, I have just a few housekeeping items to share with you all. So we do have time set aside for audience questions at the end of presentations, and you're welcome to ask questions throughout the presentation as they come up for you. And those questions should be posted in the Q&A box, not the chat box. And then also, if you happen to experience any technical difficulties while watching this presentation, you're welcome to contact MSU College of Ag and Natural Resources Tech Support at 517-355-3776. And we should have a note there for you. I don't expect you to be able to remember that phone number, but with that said, I'm going to pick up from where Rich left off and further lay foundation for how this webinar came to be. This webinar is reflective of the experience our Racial Equity in the Food System National Work Group, or REFS as you may have heard it called, underwent during the first half of this year. So as a community of cooperative extension professionals and community stakeholders coming together to connect, to learn and collaborate, our ultimate goal is to facilitate internal and external change within our institutions and society to build racial equity within the food system. And when we talk about equity, we're really talking about power sharing. So as we've been striving to mobilize for this, our guiding question has been, what would a diversified REFS membership that is designed to foster development of pluralistic relationships look like? Because at the center of institutions and change processes is people. And then we leverage opportunities, knowledge, and resources to accomplish these things. At the core, this has been a question of who are we and who do we want to be? And when you scale that up across the land-grant university system, it gets a little more complex. So we embarked on a learning journey of focused conversations among the land-grant university system to discover what we didn't know, to inspire what and who we need to be going forward. And we want to share in this experience among the broader community to catalyze the change we hope to see. So with that grounding now, we're going to find out a little bit about all of you in the audience. Next slide, please, Rachel. So got a couple of poll questions for you. Question number 1. What is your understanding of the networks of tribal, historically Black, and Hispanic-serving institutions that support success of students, educators, and researchers at these institutions? So I see some answers starting to roll in already, and while they're coming in, I'm just going to read some of the responses you can choose from. I work, study, or have previously worked, studied at one of these institutions, have little to no understanding, some level of understanding, or a high level of understanding. So we'll wait a moment and allow some of these responses to continue to come through. Okay, we're getting very close to responses from just about everyone. And it looks like we've got, we're even between little to no understanding and some level of understanding, but a little over 10% of you work or study or have previously work studied at one of these institutions. And then a few of you have a high level of understanding. Okay, thank you all for participating in that poll. So we're going to move on to the next poll question. Okay, so poll question number 2. What kind of engagement have you had with tribal, historically Black, and Hispanic-serving institutions? So again, some of your responses may be, I work, study, or have previously work studied at one of these institutions. I've collaborated on a grant project with one of these institutions. I've co-presented with one of these institutions in a training workshop or discussion panel. I participated in a student exchange or fellowship program with one of these institutions or other. Choose whichever response feels most appropriate to describe your experience. And we'll let these answers keep rolling in. And we've got about half of you responding so far. Okay, about 2/3 of the way there. All right, our answers are starting to slow down just a little bit. And it looks like almost half of the answers are other. So there's something else that is not represented on here that may represent your form of engagement. We don't have anybody that's participated in a student exchange program or a fellowship program, but we do have almost even between working or studying at or collaborating on a grant project or co-presenting with one of these institutions. And that represents almost half of all responses as well. So Thank you, folks, for giving us a little bit of insight into what your experience has been. Okay, so we're going to get ready to move on to our next slide. Next slide, Rachel, please. Okay, so we are going to get ready for presentations now. So I am happy to introduce our three panelists for today. So first we have John Phillips. He is Executive Director of First Americans Land Grant Consortium, or Falcon, a nonprofit association of Tribal University 1994 land grant administrators, directors, faculty, and staff. He is also director of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, or AHEC, leading land grant programs and policy. John is the principal of John Phillips Consulting, which provides teaching, extension, and research services related to community development, with an emphasis on rural and Native American populations. We also have Vonda Richardson, who has served as Extension Administrator since 2012, and is the first female to hold the position for the FAMU Cooperative Extension Program. She brings 26 years of experience working with small-scale farmers and communities in Florida and surrounding states. Vonda developed and conducted extension programs in alternative market development, value-added production, alternative farm enterprises, farm financial management, and farm to school. As extension administrator, she has ushered tremendous growth in FAMU's cooperative extension program and engagement of the greater university administrators, and is a, excuse me, I just skipped over something, sorry about that, an engagement of the greater university community in land grant outreach. So she also currently serves as chair for the Association of Extension Administrators and is a member of the Extension Committee on Organization and Policy. And as a career, she has embraced extension, whose strength lies in the local communities, taking research and helping people apply it to their everyday lives. She has a bachelor and master's degree in agricultural economics from Fort Valley State University and University of Georgia. And then Vonda also joined REFS earlier this year for one of our focused conversations. So we're fortunate to share this space with her again. Then we also have Richard Montez, who currently serves as Executive Director of Member Services at the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, or HACUs. In his role, Richard works closely with colleges and universities across the United States, Latin America, and Spain to connect students, faculty, and staff to important funding and advocacy resources. Richard also hosts the HACU webinar series and HACU's annual Dean's Forum on Hispanic higher education. He's passionate about initiatives that address hunger and poverty in San Antonio, Texas, and currently serves as president of the board of directors at Inner City Development, a nonprofit organization that provides emergency and recreational services to families in need. So with that, I will hand it over to John to start us off. John, whenever you're ready.
Great, thanks, Kuya. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start off with a picture. From every picture tells a story. And full disclosure, I'm not Native American. I started working in Indian country fresh out of grad school in 1997. And I took this picture while I was on my first job on the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Here you see the indigenous lands of the Lakota. You're looking east over a tribal bison range and over Lake Oahe, which is really the Missouri River that was dammed in 1962 to provide water and flood control for the non-reservation lands that you see in the distance. I use this picture because it reminds me that there is often an unseen truth in every story. And in this case, that the beauty of this picture is undermined by the fact that the Cheyenne River people once lived and prospered on the fertile Missouri River bottomlands until they were forcibly moved to the barren, windswept highlands of the prairie to make way for that dam. Next slide, please. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that November is Native American Heritage Month and that Thanksgiving is just around the corner. What stories do we tell ourselves about Native Americans and what truths do they reveal? Thanksgiving is supposed to be this neighborly story of Native Americans and pilgrims sharing a meal. Yet here in a depiction of the first Thanksgiving, we see Native Americans, presumably from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe of what is now Massachusetts, seated on the ground in a subservient posture and position, being served food by women while the pilgrim men stand at a distance. Here, the hierarchy is clear: white men first, then white women, then natives. The story this picture tells is that Native Americans are subservient, dependent, separate, and inferior. Next slide. But I'm not here to talk about Thanksgiving. I'm here to talk about tribal colleges and universities and their story. And like most tribal stories, they all start at the same place, which is what happened after first contact. Native American tribes are sovereign nations, and a key defining feature of a nation state is a defined territory. Land wasn't not only the core element of tribal nationhood, it provided the natural resource base for a robust economy prior to first contact. And contrary to popular myth, pre-contact North America was not a wilderness to be discovered, but was inhabited by thousands of tribes throughout the continent who managed their lands sustainably. Over time, as you see in the slide, those lands were taken through broken treaties, duplicity, and outright theft and violence to the red areas you see today. As lands were taken, tribal economies crashed, social structures collapsed, and cultural knowledge and practices were lost. Next slide. Fast forward, and beginning around the late 1960s and the civil rights movement, tribal activism began to take shape in a tribal self-determination movement that led to this watershed moment of the occupation of Alcatraz Island in the San Francisco Bay for 20 months, starting in 1969. Tribal self-determination simply said that tribal nations are better off determining their own paths for the future. Rather than have essential services provided to them by the government, they should be in charge of their own law and order, healthcare, natural resource management, and education. And the passing of the Tribal Self-Determination Act of 1975 codified that thinking into law. Next slide. Education in particular was viewed as a sovereign expression of restoring the social and cultural identities that were destroyed by federal Indian policies, including the failed boarding school experiments. At its core mission, tribal education is about nation building, and tribal colleges and universities were established for that very purpose. The first TCU presidents you see here were activists who built a new model of higher education from scratch and who ignored the critics who said it couldn't be done. Next slide. So what are the tribal colleges? The key points to know here is that they're very place-based, community-driven, and culturally grounded. They're very much focused on students and helping them to succeed. They conduct research. They provide extension services and community outreach. They serve as tribal archives and repositories of indigenous knowledge. They are incubators and engines of economic development in their communities. Next slide. The communities that they serve are very poor and remote. They have what is called high bonding social capital, which helps tight-knit communities survive and persist, but generally lower bridging social capital that's useful in bringing in outside information and resources. And since we're talking about networks, think of tribal communities as that last mile in a network, whether it's a power grid or a broadband network or social and professional networks. And that last mile of any network is often the most costly to build in terms of time and effort. Next slide. As social networks develop and mature, we know that they often start off as a hub and spoke with a central node providing coordination and communication. And this is very efficient in circumstances when the central node has the requisite information and the capacity to manage the network. It is inefficient if peer-to-peer relationships are desirable and if you want to expand the network beyond the capacity of that central node. There's also a single point of failure here. If the central node goes down, the entire network does as well. The two organizations I represent, Falcon and AHEC, both started off as network hubs, And over time, we've been working toward a more centralized peer-to-peer network, which is depicted in the diagram on the right. With that type of network, each node interacts with its peers so that information and resources are shared widely without a single point of failure. In this case, some efficiency in coordination is lost, but that cost is outweighed by more robust information sharing, resource sharing, innovation, and resiliency. As networks mature further, peer nodes can become bridges to other networks, or they can serve as central nodes themselves, and then all sorts of combinations and linkages can occur. Next slide. So in this next slide, I've laid out the major players in our networks. We always like to start these diagrams with tribal communities at the top because it emphasizes that tribal colleges are truly community driven. They all have tribal charters that give them legitimacy within the tribe. Their board of regents are tribal members, and their programs all serve their tribal communities. Think of tribal colleges and universities as this hybrid between an institution of higher ed, a tribal institution, and a community-based nonprofit. TCUs then interact with intermediary organizations like Falcon and AHEC, but they work directly with congressional members, federal agencies, partners, and allies. And when they have the capacity, we encourage and support tribal colleges to work directly with peers and partners, and we get out of the way. Next slide. When appropriate, Falcon, back up one. Yeah, there was a, thank you. When appropriate, Falcon and AHEC play an intermediary role in facilitating partnerships and curating information to the tribal colleges and universities. And a lot of our time is spent in exploring and developing new partnerships and opportunities, and then connecting those to the tribal colleges and universities when they're ready for prime time. I would say with the new Biden administration's focus on racial equity and in areas such as access to education, climate change, and building infrastructure, we've been busier than ever doing that work. Next slide. So a little bit about AHEC. What's important to know here is that it is the president-driven consortium or organization that deals with all things that it takes to run a college. So its board of directors are comprised of the 37 tribal college presidents. They deal with everything from Pell and student loans to broadband access, to federal funding, to campus security. So they have a lot on their plate and their scope is broad, but they only have a small staff or footprint in DC to make it all work. Because they receive almost zero funding from states, they are almost exclusively reliant on federal funding for core operations. And that means that the annual congressional appropriations cycle and any government shutdowns that may occur are existential concerns to the tribal colleges each and every year. Next slide. Falcon is focused on USDA funded land grant programming, teaching, research, and extension, and it supports faculty, administrators, extension educators, and students. It supports programs and partnerships and provides technical assistance and training, but it leaves the policy work to AHEC. Falcon is a volunteer organization. It has no paid staff. We hold an annual conference each year where all the 1994 or land grant institutions come together to share and learn. And this represents the best opportunity for potential partners to come and make connections. We just had our virtual conference a few weeks ago. Next year, we will be in Albuquerque, New Mexico in October 2022. Next slide. Finally, we have a broad range of partners and allies that connect directly to the TCUs as well as work through Falcon and AHEC as intermediaries. Next slide. These partners include professional associations, MSIs, mainstream, higher ed, federal agencies, foundations, NGOs, corporations, and for-profits, and of course, tribal governments and community-based organizations. And I'll say in the past year or so, we have been flooded with inquiries and requests. And while that is a good thing, it can be overwhelming with our limited capacity. We're having to choose to be strategic in what we do now and what needs to wait. Next slide. Finally, I want to share with you a study that identified best practices and collaboration between tribal colleges and universities and state land-grant universities. This was taken in South Dakota, the study. It identified the do's and don'ts of successful collaboration with TCUs that I think we can apply in our own work. The do's include understanding the historical and cultural context of your partner, being genuine and authentic in finding mutual benefits, connecting with people and building trust, being flexible, sharing power, and showing respect. The don'ts are the flip side of the do's and seem obvious, but you would be surprised to see how often they do happen. And next slide. So we started our conversation with one story of Thanksgiving that showed Native Americans as subservient and dependent. What if our country reimagined our engagement with Native Americans as that of equals, as friends and family might interact at a gathering? That's the difference between diversity and inclusion. That first Thanksgiving had diversity. This version of Thanksgiving has inclusion. A reimagined Thanksgiving would create a different narrative that could inform everything from how history is taught in schools, how we acknowledge taken indigenous lands, how we treat sports mascots, how we fund and make programs accessible and equitable. So I leave you with that question today. How can you help change the Native American narrative through the work that you do? Thanks. And I will now turn it over to Vonda. Vonda?
Thank you, John, and good afternoon. Again, I'm Vonda Richardson. I'm Extension Administrator here at Florida A&M University, and I also serve as Chair of the Association of 1890 Extension Administrators. Next slide, please. I want to back up just a little bit, just to kind of give a little bit of background. I'm sure many of you know about what a land-grant institution is. But basically, these are institutions that were designated either by the state or Congress legislature to receive benefits of the Morrill Act of 1862, 1890, and this also includes legislation that designated the 1994s that John spoke of, and the Hispanic-Serving institutions. Congress created this land-grant system of colleges and universities to make practical higher education accessible to the layperson and working families. The land-grant system overall took shape through four pieces of major landmark legislations that endowed these institutions with three missions. And we talked about that earlier: teaching, research, and extension. Next slide, please. Would you start with the Morrill Act, which was in 1862, it established it reflected a growing demand of agriculture and technical education for the U.S. Although a number of institutions had begun to expand on classical education, higher education still was not accessible by the masses of people. And so this first act was intended to broaden the segment of the population with a practical applied education. And at this time, there were 70 land-grant colleges that were established. Next slide. I just want to mention that there were 4 Black schools established under the first Morrill Act, and that was Alcorn in Mississippi, Claflin in South Carolina, Hampton in Virginia, and Kentucky State. And of course, if you all know about the 1890 institutions, only Alcorn and Kentucky State are still part of our current network. The land grant designation for Claflin and Hampton was given to other institutions in those states. Next slide, please. At the time that the 1862 grants were established, of course, there was a separation of the races, and Blacks were not allowed to attend the original land grant institutions, minus the 4 that were established for persons of color. But eventually, and here's a typo, it's not 19 states, it's actually 18 states, 19 institutions eventually were supported institutions that became as the 1890 colleges and universities. And we are primarily located in the southern region with some universities in the along the eastern seaboard. Next slide, please. There's a lot going on during this time. And because extension is my heart, not that teaching and research is not important. We understand how those are natural forms of the educational experience. But there was something different that was happening in the country of being able to take the university, what's taught in the classroom, and what's being discovered in the laboratories, and taking it to the people. And so the beginning of cooperative extension, what is considered cooperative extension work in the United States, came into existence prior to 1850. Of course, you know, that was slavery had not been abolished. You had some agricultural societies in the eastern states that provided public lectures on agricultural topics. And then we even had farmer institutes that were held as early as 1863. By 1899, at least 47 states were holding these institutes, and basically faculty and members of these colleges and farmers were used as speakers to bring that knowledge to rural areas. Next slide, please. Here with the 1890s, the first cooperative extension program emerged at Tuskegee Institute, which is now Tuskegee University in Alabama. And this is where George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington actually visited farmers and families in Alabama in an effort to help them help themselves. They soon realized that that's a full-time job, as many of our extension personnel know, to take this message of self-help to the people. Next slide, please. And here you can see several pictures depicting those early farm institutes, those early meetings, and how that information was taken to the community. 1899, George Washington Carver developed a plan of a mule-drawn wagon that would take farm machinery and seeds and other equipment to demonstrate to farmers improved methods of production. Of course, this was formalized into a mobile vehicle that was established by Tuskegee in 1906. And it was called the Jessup Wagon, or the Farmers College on Wheels. And so you can see the pictures here. Great history. Next slide, please. Here again, when you're looking at having a full-time person, Thomas Moore Campbell was the first extension agent employed in cooperative extension ever on November 12th, 1906, at Tuskegee. On that same day, an agent was hired in Texas. He was the first county agent to serve a single county. So there was a lot going on during this period of being able to, we were educating people in rural communities and underserved areas. Research was being conducted, but at the same time, all that was learned on those campuses and discovered in those labs was beginning to be transferred to the average person in the communities. Next slide, please. So if you bring us to present day, there are 19 1890 institutions. We are represented by the Association of Extension Administrators. This organization was chartered in the late 1980s. I think the charter is 1988. And basically AEA is what we call it, is the official representative body of the 19 cooperative extension administrators that constitute the 1890 land grant system. We are one of the 5 regions of the national cooperative extension system that encompasses 1862s, 1994s, and Hispanic-Serving institutions. And here, AEA represents the collective interests of those administrators and their collective dealings with national organization, the Extension Committee on Organization and Policy, or ECOP, the Board of Agricultural Assembly, which really deals with a lot of funding, the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, and of course, our very strong partner with USDA, NIFA, and other federal agencies and organizations. And you can see here, this is the executive committee, a chair, vice chair, secretary, immediate past chair and treasurer. And then we also have an executive administrator that helps with the day-to-day operations of the organization. Next slide, please. Here is our mission. Basically, we want assist diverse audiences with emphasis on those who have limited social and economic resources in order to improve the quality of life and vitality of individuals and communities through transformational engagement and outreach education. Basically, this is informal education that we're providing to communities. Our vision states that we are the premier provider of transformational university engagement and outreach education to underserved and diverse audiences that promote sustainable economies, environments, communities, and families. And these are the 5 core themes that we operate under, and it pretty much mirrors cooperative extension, nutrition, health, and wellness of families and communities, economic prosperity and well-being of rural and urban communities, community youth, family resilience, environmental, natural resources, and renewable energy. And then one of our hallmarks is agricultural profitability and sustainability of small scale farms. Next slide, please. Just some of the networks and the systems that we have in place that support us, that support our students, that support researchers and faculty and our extension personnel. Like I mentioned before, the Morrill Acts of 1862 and 1890 established the teaching component of the land grant mission. Hatch Act of 1887 operationalized the research component primarily for 1862. And then here again in 1914, Smith-Lever established cooperative extension. We were still operating and conducting those functions even until we just started receiving funding from the federal government in 1977 under the legislation section 1444, which is 1890 extension, and section 1445 is Evans-Allen's research. And so a lot of our institutions, we did not have the federal funding nor the state funding, and the universities basically were still conducting those activities without the federal funds. Next slide, please. Some of the additional programs that support our students, faculty, and researchers are funding through McIntyre Stennis, which is a forestry research program. And here their research projects are research activities are engaged, as well as training for students. In extension, we have the Expanded Food Nutrition Education program, and that is the nation's first nutrition education program for low-income populations. The Renewable Resources Extension Act assists states in carrying out programs that assist forest and range land owners in making management decisions. Next slide, please. As well as there have been some new legislations that support what we do. In the last Farm Bill, there was authorization for 6 1890 Centers of Excellence. And this is where teaching, research, and extension comes together through those 19 member universities in these areas. The 4 that are highlighted are the ones that have been funded thus far. But as we move through the Farm Bill and as additional funds are appropriated, we're hoping that all 6 will be funded. We also have the 1890 facilities program. And basically these are funds that provide for the acquisition and improvement of agriculture and food science facilities at our institutions. The 1890 capacity building program, which strengthened teaching, research, and extension programs in food and agricultural sciences. They can be standalone teaching, research, or extension, or they can be integrated programs. And then probably lastly, and the one that we're really, really proud about, are the 1890 scholarship program that was funded in the last Farm Bill that support recruiting, engaging, and retaining undergraduate students at 1890s and encouraging their pursuit in the food and agricultural sciences. We are really, really, really happy of the networks that we've established with our USDA partner, but also the networks that we establish here at the state level and at the local level. Of course, we have really good working relationships with our 1862 partners. Those states that are fortunate to have multiple institutions that provide, I know, extension work. It's not, I don't see it as a duplication of effort. It's where we can come together and coordinate and to provide, make sure that no person gets left behind. We also partner with nonprofits, our local municipal governments, as well as just basic community people. And so that's the backbone of what we do, and it helps sustains us. Thank you, that's all I have. And I will pass it on to my colleague, Richard.
Thank you, Vonda. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me and as a representative of the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. And I'd like to thank Rich and Michigan State University for inviting me to be part of this presentation. Fun fact, Michigan State University is and has been a member of HACU for over 20 years, an associate member of our association. So we appreciate the continued support. What I want to do today is kind of take you through a journey of HSIs and the journey of HACU. Kind of help you understand what the history of HSIs has been, and then tell you a little bit about where we are now with the HSI federal designation and funding, and take some time to tell you a little bit about HACU and how some of your respective campuses might be able to work with our association on a number of different initiatives and programs that could benefit your faculty, staff, and of course your students. HACU was founded initially in 1986 by 18 institutions, originally here in San Antonio, Texas, at Our Lady of the Lake University, which is a private four-year institution. And these initial conversations about the growing needs for funding at institutions that had high enrollment of Latinx students started with these campuses, who were seeing an influx of enrollment of Latinx students, but that the funding available, that the funding wasn't available, and that anything they were able to successfully acquire in funding just wasn't enough. And that has unfortunately been the narrative historically, right? The growth of Latinx students in higher education has far outpaced the funding available to these institutions to adequately serve the population of Latinx students. And so in 1986, they put together the association, the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities, and immediately began to work to find a way to leverage federal dollars to benefit Hispanic serving institutions and serve their students. And it wasn't until 1992 that HACU and our partner institutions were able to lobby and convince Congress to create a federal designation of Hispanic serving institutions. Now, what does that mean? I noticed that at the onset of the presentation, we ran a poll asking if you had any familiarity with HSIs or had ever in your past work or current work worked with HSIs. And notice that some of you have had some exposure, right? But just to give you an idea, HSIs are institutions, 2 or 4 year institutions who have at least 25% enrollment of Latinx students. And the Department of Education's website can give you some more details about what some of the other requirements are. For example, the number of students receiving Pell Grants to be federal, to be able to apply as a campus to be a federally recognized Hispanic serving institution. So HSIs across the US are actually plenty. Some folks might be surprised to learn that there are, in fact, 569 institutions in the US that are federally designated or at least meeting the 25% threshold to be considered Hispanic serving institutions. I mean, that's a massive number of colleges and universities across the US. Now, these institutions are comprised very much so of two-year public institutions. So your local colleges and colleges, two-year colleges. 150 of them are four-year public campuses. 160 are four-year privates, and then 15 two-year private institutions. Together, those institutions, HSIs enroll 5.24 million students of undergraduate and graduate students here in the US. So you can see sort of the impact that these institutions have on higher education in general. And 320 of the Hispanic-serving institutions are HACU members, right? So sometimes there's a little bit of a gray area when we get asked about who HACU represents and how many of our members are HSIs. Not all HSIs are HACU members. I'll just kind of caveat that, right? There are 569 HSIs, but 320 of those institutions have opted into becoming HACU members. And we, of course, have a goal every year of having all 569 of these institutions join our association for obvious reasons, right? The more institutions that we have standing with us in membership, the more leverage we have in the legislative advocacy that we do in Washington. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that here in a minute. HSIs, some quick facts, also enroll 33% of Pell Grant recipients. HSIs enroll 2/3 of the 3.8 million US Hispanic students. And there is also a great deal of diversity when you look at the number of, or the population of students that HSIs actually serve, of not just Latinx students, but the Asian American population and the Black population of the US. So HSIs, although they have a high number of Latinx students enrolled on their campuses, they are extremely diverse, which lends itself to the narrative of when you really prioritize Hispanic-serving institutions, you are prioritizing all demographics and backgrounds in the US with respect to the federal budget. And that has been very much so our narrative when we're working with folks in Washington, DC. So just to give you an idea of sort of the scope of what HACU has been able to accomplish through our legislative work. And I'll step back a moment. We have a team in Washington, DC, who does legislative advocacy and works directly with members of Congress and their aides to make sure that members of Congress and folks in DC are familiar with what HSIs are in the first place, right? We find ourselves doing a lot of educating with members of Congress and folks in DC about what HSIs are in the first place. There may very well be 569 of these in the US, but you'd be surprised how little is known about these institutions as a group by folks in Washington. And so our team there works very, very diligently to make sure that there are specific items brought up in the federal budget, particularly under Title V, that are monies that are allocated to serve HSIs so that they can build creative and innovative initiatives and spaces on their campuses for Latinx students and in turn for all students. We also have a team in our Western Regional Office, which covers most of California and the Southwest of the United States. That team there is responsible for working closely with our members in California to advance state advocacy in California to make sure that those appropriations are also keeping up as much as possible with the growth of Latinx students enrolled in higher ed in California. As many of you may know, HSIs, the majority of HSIs are across the United States, but over 140 of them are found in California. So there is a massive need in that state to make sure that funding for HSIs continues to be a priority at that level. And in turn, across the US, a lot of folks will say as goes California, eventually as goes the rest of the nation with respect to Latinx higher education and growth. So that's a little bit of the legislative part of what we do. Aside from the legislative of the side of the House, we also do a lot of in-house programming and initiatives to directly benefit our colleges, universities, their faculty, staff, and students. So I'll tell you a little bit about our programming here. HAKU has a student services department that is run by our executive director of student services, Jeanette Morales, and her team does an amazing job of working with partners, both at the federal agency level and the corporate level, to find opportunities for students. And I'll tell you a bit about what those are. We have a federal and corporate internship program that offers paid internships for both undergraduate and graduate students. And these paid internships can happen at federal agencies, or they can happen at corporate partners. Our federal program in the past has placed interns at USDA, at the CIA. There have been students that have been placed at the Treasury Department and a number of other federal agencies as those partnerships become available. On the corporate side, we work closely with the STEM industry. So we've had many of our interns that are participating in various initiatives and internships at Google, with internships at Deloitte and Oracle and other corporate partners. We also offer a scholarship program. Throughout the year, there are a number of different scholarships available through HAKU and our corporate partnerships. Those can be found in our website. And I should add, I don't have any slides, but I like to present more orally here. But I am going to be providing some links to some of these programs in the chat box here after the presentation so that you can learn more about these things. And so our scholarship programs are exclusively for HAKU member institution students, right? So if you're enrolled at a HAKU member institution, remember it doesn't have to be an HSI because we have members that run the gamut of Latinx enrollment. But if you are a student at a HAKU member institution, you are eligible to apply for these scholarship programs. And they're all so unique. And I'll give you an example. We've got one scholarship that is made possible through our partnership with Southwest Airlines. It's called the Lanzate Scholarship. And what Lanzate does is, first and foremost, it recognizes the impact that the experiences that many students have when they leave home to go to college somewhere else, right? Particularly first generation Latinx students, and the really challenging experiences that some of these students may have, and the financial barriers to coming back home for emergencies, during the holidays, for the summer break, to be able to travel to internship opportunities as well. And so with the help of Southwest Airlines, we are able to offer travel vouchers to students from HAKU member institutions, up to 4 round-trip travel vouchers to these students so that they can travel across the country to the various opportunities they have for professional development or internship opportunities, or just to visit family. That is one unique scholarship opportunity that we have through HAKU, and many, many others. So again, I'll share that link to our student program so you folks can get a better understanding of what we currently have available. And then throughout the year, keep an eye on that so you can advocate for your students to apply for these programs. The other part of what we do, and really one of the largest parts of what we do, is our conferences. HAKU hosts 2 conferences throughout the year. The first is our annual Capital Forum. This is also part of our legislative component. The Capital Forum invites HAKU member institutions to Washington, D.C. on a couple days in April. And it provides a number of different opportunities, learning and professional development opportunities. So networking and roundtables having to do with legislative advocacy, right? Maybe there are some issues in your region that you want to be proactive about, or the challenges that your campuses are having with respect to legislation in DC that you want to be able to address with your members of Congress directly. HAKU has done a really good job of being able to facilitate those meetings so that representatives from our member institutions can meet with members of Congress and talk to them face-to-face, or their aides, about some of their concerns, either at the regional, state, or federal levels. And so that's a good opportunity for our campuses to legislate or to advocate for legislation alongside us in DC. The second opportunity is our large annual conference. The HACU Annual Conference on Hispanic Higher Education takes place once a year in late October, usually in October, sometimes early November, in different parts of the country. This coming year, we are scheduled to be in San Diego. Finally, we think we're going to be able to be back face-to-face. Our last two conferences have been virtual. But at this face-to-face conference, we usually invite about 2,000 attendees, and 500 or 600 of them are usually undergraduate and graduate students. And these students get the opportunity to participate in networking events, roundtables, panels. We have also an exhibitor hall that welcomes various colleges, universities, and corporate partners, where many of our students get a chance to interview with potential employers, and some get hired. That's the student track. On the professional end of the conference, we also welcome faculty and staff, higher education administrators, college and university presidents to do the same, right? Serve on panels, participate in roundtables, networking events, and really just we try our very best to build this feeling of unity and oneness, right, in Latinx higher education in our conferences. And I'm confident that people always leave really motivated and inspired by the different stories that they hear, and go back to their own respective campuses with new tools and resources for advocating in Latinx higher education. So those are a little bit about our two conferences. Now, when it comes to HACU membership, I haven't got an opportunity to see just yet what institutions are represented on this call, but I invite you to visit our website, hacu.net, and learn a little bit more about what institutions are HACU members. I'll share a membership directory here in the chat in a moment, so that you can see if your campus is a HACU member. If your campus is not, and you're interested in joining HACU, or learning more, at least a bit, about the services and benefits that we offer as an association, I'm more than happy to have one-on-one conversations with you all or with other leaders on campus to help you understand a little bit better about what that means. And HACU membership really is all about getting out of it what you put in, right? If you are more interested in participating in the legislative aspect of HACU membership, then that's kind of the track that will help you get into and connect with the right folks here at HACU. If you're more interested in acquiring resources for your students through the internship program or the scholarship program, we're happy to do that as well. So whatever it is that you are interested in with getting more involved with HACU, we're more than happy to help you navigate those waters. Again, I appreciate you all giving me the opportunity to be here and talk to you about HSIs and HACU, and I'm again more than happy to answer any questions during the Q&A. Thank you.
All right, thank you for those presentations. Rachel, I'll have you go to the next slide. All right, at this point, we are ready for discussion and Q&A, and such a wealth of information shared here today. And yet I know that was only beginning to scratch the surface of what you are doing in your institutions and across your institutional systems. But luckily, we have time to dig in a little bit deeper now. And as we're posing questions, one, you can still continue to use the Q&A box. Our presenters have been answering questions there, but we've also got a couple of questions to ask of our speakers to keep the conversation going. And then Rich, I'll also invite you in at any time if you'd like to pose a question to the panelists. But let's start off slowly. So what resources do your institutions and institutional systems offer that you find to be most underutilized or not well known, but have maybe the greatest potential for impact from your perspective? And whoever would like to start.
I'll start. Probably some of our capacity building resources. for the most part, I think just like John had mentioned, most of our funding that funds, our operations and our people come from our Capacity 1890 extension and Evans Allen's research. It funds the people that do the work. And so probably some of the lesser utilized resources are those competitive dollars that are out there. Sometimes just on scale, some of the 1890s may not, we're not successful in securing a lot of those types of funding unless we partner with an 1862 or we're partnering with other groups. And so a lot of times that kind of hinders our access and our ability to be able to utilize more competitive funds that's competitive more on a national basis. Pound for pound, I think the work that's being presented, but I think it's scale. And when and then too, you have to be on some of those committees in order to, I think John mentioned again about inclusion. We have diversity, but sometimes that next step to inclusion is actually having everyone that's part of the family to be able to have full access.
I guess I'll add, our biggest needs at our member institutions is capacity in terms of funding, of course, but also people power, just the people to do the work, being that they're in very remote locations. So one of the programs that we've administered is an AmeriCorps Vista program where we place volunteers that work in tribal communities at tribal colleges for a year at a time to help build the capacity in those areas that are needed. So we have, we've been working with AmeriCorps Vista in Washington, D.C. to provide people and funding to do that. And yet it's not been as received as well as we had hoped. And I think part of that is there's still a cost to accepting a volunteer and supporting them and supervising them. So something else we're looking at now is faculty exchanges, or even graduate students maybe doing postdocs that might serve at a tribal college for a year, get some experience, help build capacity there and help build out their programs and have a wonderful experience. So that's one of the resources we have that we'd like to see more participation in.
Yeah, and at Haku, we have really been able to, in the last couple of years, build on a couple things that we've had as priorities. And one of those is increasing the number of college presidents that are Latino in the US. And the way we are helping to do that now is through something called our La Academia de Liderazgo. It's essentially Leadership Academy. And what it aims to do is provide a number of professional development opportunities, trainings, networkings, and mentoring to up-and-coming Latinx leaders in higher education. And so that program right now is underway with its third cohort. And so we invite folks on the call to explore that. If you are interested in the program or maybe know somebody who might be interested in joining the fourth cohort and maybe becoming a college or university president in the future, I think this might be a good opportunity. The other thing I'll mention is we get a lot of inquiries from our member institutions about where do we find Latinx faculty and staff, right? We know that it's important to hire more diverse faculty and staff, and we need some help in getting good candidates. So we created something called the Pro Talento Job Board. Our job board is essentially a interactive, I like to think user-friendly and intuitive job board that connects institutions of higher learning with candidates, essentially, who are professors and provosts and higher ed administrators and deans. So that's a resource that we hope more colleges and universities will utilize to find good talent and hopefully diversify their pools of candidates.
So next question kind of builds upon the last question I just asked. Are there any trends you see emerging across the land-grant university system that resources need to be allocated to?
Leah, repeat that again. I'm sorry. I was
Yeah.
reading one of the questions.
Yeah, and we're going to back into that question in just a second. So curious if there are any trends you see emerging across the land-grant university system that resources need to be allocated to, maybe things that are promising.
I think we've been pushing more on the facility side for upgraded facilities and making sure that technology advancements are being utilized, and also scholarships, in increasing the number of students that are pursuing these baccalaureate degrees. Has been the impetus in 1890 community.
I'll add, there's been a fair amount of new funding for what we call competitive research grants that fund cutting edge, agricultural research and other areas. But there's been the funding for what we call capacity programs, which is just basic operational support for tried and true extension programs like 4-H and the expanded food and nutrition education program, and others have been flat for a very, very long time. And so I think there's a real need, and that includes the 1890 and the 1994 and the HSI programs were all kind of included in that capacity area. And there's been a real lack of attention and funding for those capacity line items that really support a lot of the work that we do each day. So the glitzy research is important too. It's cutting edge, and that's been funded well, but we just haven't seen the same attention given to our base programs that are still much needed.
And I would add that with respect to HSI specifically, one of the items in HAKU's legislative agenda for 2022 has requesting that we have an additional 55 million under the National Science Foundation for HSI programs. Right, we know that STEM initiatives and STEM pathways are becoming increasingly important, and with respect to our partnerships with corporate partners, there is always that hunger and thirst for a more diverse population or pool of employees. And so we know it's important to create that pipeline, and we're advocating now for those federal dollars to be advocated to more STEM-oriented initiatives and opportunities.
Okay, so Vonda, a question for you that's going to back into two questions that we have from the audience. You talked earlier about some new legislation that's come through to support HBCUs, that about 2/3 of that has been funded. What are the remaining two pieces of legislation?
Oh, it's not legislation. These are the 1890 Centers of Excellence.
Yes.
There were 6 that were authorized in the last Farm Bill. To date, we've funded 4. Each year, and of course, this is based on congressional appropriation. Mm-hmm. As they appropriate more monies, we're able to add on additional centers, and we're hoping this year that we can fund all 6 can be funded. And of course, this is seed funding. It's not funding that support these centers, and these centers are not brick and mortar. They're just collaborations of our institutions around a particular topic area or thrust area. And it's integrated research, teaching, and extension.
All right, thank you for that clarification, Vonda. So question related to that from the audience. Comment, just heard a report that states underfunded HBCUs and that the funding was being diverted for other purposes. What are HBCUs doing to hold these states accountable?
I am not going to touch that one. No. Particularly being diverted, because that would be illegal. And I think it's just more of two things. I think there's a lot that a lot of us need to be held accountable for that. Universities, our land grant programs have to do a better job of selling ourselves to our university administration, so that they go and request a lot of the additional funding. So there are some in-house things that we have to deal with. On the state level, there's just disparity, and we just have to keep fighting that fight Here in the state of Florida, it's the match component that the state provides for our sister 1862 is 8-1, and we're at roughly 50% of match. And so it's just a fight that we just got to continue. And a lot of it, I tell my staff that we're not going to sit here and throw a pity party. We've got to tell our story. We've got to make sure that we have a product that people want and let them tell our story. Let them fight for us. Of course, we it's a family, and so what they said, the rising tide raises all ships. And so we're really trying to make sure that the family understands the issues that affect all of us, and so that we're able to be able to backstop each other and to be able to advocate for each other. So I hope that kind of answers the question. I can't speak to funds being diverted. They're not being diverted in my state, and I don't know of any that's being diverted for other purposes. Like I said, that would be illegal.
And I just want to invite John and Richard in if you have any insights or thoughts to add to this conversation that's happening right now.
You want to go, Richard?
No, go ahead, John. I actually don't have any input, but I think Vonda managed to cover it well.
Well, I would just say in general, states have been cutting support to education, higher education, whether they're mainstream institutions or minority serving institutions. And I know the 1890s have a state match that if it's not provided, then that basically cuts their federal funding as well. And that is definitely, up to the state legislature on what they want to do or don't do for that. With tribal colleges, I mentioned in my presentation, we don't get any state funding. So I don't know if that's a blessing or curse in these times, but it's not really, even when we provide higher education for non-tribal students that would otherwise be supported by states at community colleges, they don't support those students. So, in some states, we may have more promise than others in making that happen. But I would say, just generally speaking, states are losing interest in funding higher education, and that's a trend that's been going on for a while.
This relates to a question in the chat box that looks like, Vonda, you started typing an answer to, but we'll go ahead and say this one out loud. To follow up on your statement about 1890 institutions not always being very successful at securing competitive external funding, could you elaborate on what some of the reasons for this might be?
Like I mentioned before, I think scale is one. A lot of time reviewers are looking for those high dollar projects, not saying that just because they're high dollar, they're high impact, but they look at scale. A lot of times, collaboration, having those different pieces that show capacity to be able to do that particular research. Sometimes it's not there. A lot of times, I think it's just, what I've seen is just mostly, a lot of times it's just scale. The projects may seem to be too small for these large pots of money.
Mm-hmm. So I think the conversation that we're having right now about legislation, funding, advocacy, we've had at least one question in the chat in regard to the Farm Bill, and then Richard touched on the role of legislative advocacy among HSI. So what advocacy strategies are working? What additional capacity is needed for this? So Richard, I know you had a lot to share about what HSIs are doing, and certainly if you want to share more details, and then welcome you to do so, but open to all of our panelists.
Well, one thing I will add and try to answer the question in the Q&A about what HAKU is doing to support students to raise college completion rates or undocumented students. Mostly what we do with respect to undocumented students is through our legislative efforts, right? So our team in DC is working really day in and day out until we can see a permanent passage of the DREAM Act, and that those students can can learn freely in the US and be able to thrive in their higher education journeys. And we see a lot of DACA students who attend our conferences and different initiatives at Haku to be able to learn, one, how to do advocacy as well, and two, be able to be part of some of the initiatives that we have where DACA students are eligible. So just wanted to throw that in there with respect to legislative advocacy for immigration reform, which Haku is always in communication with folks in DC about our desire to see comprehensive immigration reform passed.
I'll just say, I think, I think a lot of advocacy is about telling your story and reaching the right audience and connecting with them. And I think something that has legs with us recently is this idea that traditional ecological knowledge holds the key to some of our most pressing answers today, whether it's with climate change or building more robust local food systems, fire management in the West, forest management in the West. And so we've been telling that story and backing it up with impacts and programs that we've done. And I think people are interested in hearing that and supporting that. And people at USDA and the land grant system and ultimately in Congress.
Yeah, I totally agree with the sentiments of my colleagues. It's all about telling our story and having that advocacy. Whatever is pressing in that's pressing to our particular part of the family, and being able to articulate and being able to tell that story is critical.
And I'll just call to everyone's attention that there are some wonderful resources being put up in the chat box right now. So please take note of that. But while we're in this discussion, I think, John, you mentioned earlier about the new presidential administration's focus on racial equity. So question for all of you, how is this impacting your institutions?
I'll start, I guess. It's amazing. It is. I mentioned this. We are being flooded with opportunity. It feels like there's this nexus of awareness around racial justice, food justice, environmental justice, and climate change, and all of these movements and priorities in the new administration are coming together to really present a lot of potential opportunity for our member institutions and for us at AHEC and Falcon. And the challenge is just to make sense of it, to know what's strategic, what we can move on now, what has to wait till later. But I think we're in a moment of history where this, if you look at politics, this window is not going to stay open for much longer, as most experts would say. So we have this opportunity right now to really advocate and build capacity for our member institutions. So we're running all out, flat out, 100% right now to try to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I'll add as well. I echo much of what John has said about this window of opportunity that we have to see real impact, right, on some of the efforts many of us have been making for some time. And I'll give you some examples. We know that recently the Build Back Better Act was passed. And so in Haku's work with some of our allies in DC, you'll see in the legislation that there was a $3 billion research and development infrastructure competitive grant program for MSIs that was included. That we were able to secure an increase in $470 million for HSI STEM and articulation programs. And then there was a raising in the amount of the Pell Grant to $550, which has been really the largest one-time increase since I think 2009 or 10. And that's including an extension of eligibility to DACA students and temporary protected students with temporary protected status. So those are really some measures and success stories that have only been possible here in the last year or two with this administration's focus on equality and funding and opportunities and resources, particularly in higher education.
And I'll speak to, of how we some of the ways that we got to this point. It was out of some tragedy. It was a lot of, just racial injustice. We've seen just at historically Black colleges and universities in general, enrollment of Black students coming back to Black institutions. So some of our institutions have seen increases in enrollment. And here again, because of some of those ugly things that have been going on and have been captured, we have an administration that recognizes that and people that recognize, and we're able to see a lot of those where you have the difference in funding and opportunities. And so with a lot of the legislation that's gone through, with a lot of these large funding packages through Congress, there's a lot of programs that stand to benefit. And here again, if we, now is the time to take advantage of it. That window is, it ebbs and flows, so when it's here, take advantage of it. And because when it's gone, it's gone.
So a question related to this, I think you all either touched on this or started to touch on this in some way, but I'll allow you to expound if you have anything else to add. What are the greatest points of leverage you see across the land-grant university system to advocate for systemic change in favor of racial equity?
I think leveraging our collective voice, speaking as one. I mean, as one. We often talk about the family, and in some families, everybody's not all everybody doesn't benefit as well as others. But if we keep leveraging those relationships and continue the dialogue and opening those lines of communications, I think are things that we definitely could capitalize on just internally. And then in turn, if we do that, then we're in a better position to be able to advocate for ourselves as well as for each other, for the uplift of the whole system.
I'll add as well that Haku over the last several years has really focused more on building relationships and understanding and collaboration between HSIs and HBCUs, right? Because we know that there is a great deal of opportunity there for HBCUs and HSIs to partner on legislative advocacy, right? Which is a huge deal, which brings a great deal of presence and influence. And also partner on better understanding what it is that, what measures and initiatives and creative opportunities there are to better serve Latinx students and Black students as well. So I think in sheer number, HSIs and HBCUs really have a great deal of opportunity to work together and make an impact in higher education, particularly.
One of the areas we're working on is understanding that the way the land grant system is funded encourages us to stay in our separate lanes, because everybody has their own little pots of money, and that includes the mainstream institutions too. And so trying to figure out ways in writing requests for proposals or applications, RFAs, that incentivize working together across institutional types, whether it's 1890s or HBCU or HSIs or 1862s, finding ways to start breaking down that scaffolding that's been set up since 1862 and 1890 that put us in our own separate lanes. So trying to figure out the what they call choice architecture and figuring out how to incentivize people to work together, because at the end of day, a lot of people are going to follow where the dollars go and how they're administrated. And so if we can figure out ways to move people together using that lever, I think that's pretty effective.
So each of you is talking about the importance of collaborations and building those relationships that lead to collaborations. And we've got two questions in the chat box that, Richard, I think they kind of go together for you. Is there anything to be learned from Hispanic institutions based in native Hispanic countries? Any collaborations? And then also, is MSI where all these institutions can build unity and intersection to make all stronger?
To answer Florencia's question first, yes, I think that really is sort of a natural opportunity to collaborate, right? Because of cultural similarities and language as well. We have an international component here at HACU. We do have international members in Latin America and Spain, and a great deal of members in Puerto Rico. And so we know that there are a number of opportunities in collaborations through either exchange programs or internship opportunities internationally, and learning opportunities internationally that students can benefit from, and institutions in other countries that really reach out to us often to learn more about how we're better serving Latinx students here and vice versa. So through our international programs and initiatives, including our international conference and international scholarship programs, we do a lot of that connection. We like to think that we're the connection point between US-based institutions and other institutions throughout the world to be able to learn from one another. In terms of MSI, I would agree, and I invite Vonda and John to contribute here as well. But you'll see that in a lot of the verbiage that we use in our legislative plan for 2021 and then in 2022, you'll see that we refer to MSIs a great deal because, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, there is a huge cross section of populations that are served at HSIs, and in making sure that we're advocating for HSIs and resources, we like to think that we're in turn advocating for all demographics. And so we find some commonality in a number of ways under the minority serving institutions label, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree in the collective nature of that, but I know sometimes within the HBCU community, sometimes the 1890 land grants get lost. And so, you know, how do you navigate, how do you weigh the different types of funding that's available for certain types of institutions as opposed to others? But definitely agree that you start at the collective and build from there. I think that's the best place for the collaboration to begin.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think the more power and voice you have collectively, the better you will be, big picture. And when I look at where the 1890s are regionally and where the 1994s are, and HSIs are, you know, also in the mix there. I mean, we cover the entire country and we have voice and representation from all the states, and collectively that's a powerful a voice. So we just got to figure out how to do it.
Well, that is bringing us right to the end of our webinar. Rachel, can I have you go to the last slide? And as we're transitioning, I just want to take a moment to thank all of our guest speakers today, John Phillips, Vonda Richardson, and Richard Montez. And just to let you all know, the webinar recording and slides will be available to all registrants by November 29th. And you can also find recordings of previous webinars from Center for Regional Food Systems and Racial Equity in the Food System Work Group resources on racial equity in the food system. I believe Rich might have put a link. Just
put it in the chat pod.
Perfect timing. And then also, please join the Equity Food Listserv to have more opportunities to participate. Same link.
Same link.
All on one page to make it easy. And also to let you know, this webinar is funded in part by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. Rich, anything to further close us out with?
nothing other than thanking the speakers and thanking you, Clea, for moderating.
Okay, and thank you, audience members, for joining us today, and we will see you in the new year.